We are back to the Dragons of the Grove. If you have not seen the first 3 videos, I go ahead and suggest doing so. However, if you want to go ahead and get a quick recap, there's not really a quick recap method other than party of adventurers become criminals. They have then gone ahead, they found this vampire who then escaped this mountain. Then they went ahead and found a devil's grove where that was captured by demons and undead. They turned into dragons using some magic doohickey. They had then cleared out all the undead and devils, and they have now been dubbed as the party known as the Dragons of the Grove. And we're going to go ahead and blast through some of these bullet points. As I told you guys last time, we are on bullet point number 14. Bullet point 14 out of over 100. So I'm going to go ahead and try to blast through some of these, and we're going to go ahead and hopefully get at least past another 5. So the Dragons of the Grove have now been dubbed as heroes as the world's Druid of the Groves. So the Druids of the Grove is actually an idea taken from 2nd edition D&D. The way Druids worked in that particular setting was actually really fascinating. Druids could only get to a certain level before they had to go off and fight other Druids in order to advance in level. That's because Druids work on a hierarchy. There's Druid, and then there's Archdruid, and then it's Druid of the Grove, Archdruid, and then once you hit level I think there's only 5 Archdruids on any given continent, and then that's what you would hit at level 15, and then level 16 and beyond, you would become the Hierophant, which is the one druid in charge of all the world. It was a really cool bit of flavor text, and I'm pretty sure I didn't get that right. Don't crucify me yet. This is just the rough idea, and it's not super important right now on what you needed to know. Like I said, I'm pretty sure I got some of those details wrong, but all the Archdruids on this particular continent have gone ahead, and they are now traveling to the Devil's Grove in order to decide a couple things. One thing they need to decide is what to do with this Druid Grove. This Druid Grove has been important for thousands of years because it kept Zatch the Blood Moon sealed underneath. Now that Zatch is gone, they weren't sure what to do with it. 2, the next thing that they needed to do was to appoint a new Archdruid. One of the Archdruids died before from the Necromancer and his soul artist girlfriend. Oh, bit of side note, one thing I forgot to mention. The sister of the elf girl from last time, I mentioned she was kind of dressed up as Slave Leia. Yeah, I did not make that very clear. She was a traitor. She turned the family heirloom into a phylactery, which she then used for soul arts. And yeah, that she was a bad person all along. That was the twist I was going for. I did not explain it very well in that video, and I understand the confusion that some of you had. Thank you for asking those questions. Another thing they need to do is they need to know what they need to do with the previous elf family. Ias Durathil was once an ally of the Druids of the Grove. However, as it turned out, because that sister was a traitor, and because she allowed the devil to escape and did all this stuff, the family is now under really hot water. So that is kind of what we were going off on. Now, I said that they were going to do a Druid moot, and I want to be very clear that this Druid moot is basically this meeting of these Council of Druids. Now, a lot of my players were under the impression this was going to be a very nice and polite roundtable discussion, and I made it very clear that no, it wasn't. I don't know where this cliche got started. I want to blame Tolkien, but I'm only blaming him in the sense that there's not been ooh, I'm gonna get in hot water for that one. So what I say by that is Tolkien was the one who really started the cliche that elves are all these really polite people and nature wizards are all these really soft-spoken, polite individuals that just kind of protect nature through very nice and soft means. Now, I know that's not true for everything, but at the very least, the Peter Jackson movies have kind of reinforced that stereotype. And that's what they thought they were getting. And I made it very clear, no. Druids are basically introverts that live in secluded sections of the wild for long periods of time. Their only companions are animals, and they live by the strongest of the fittest sort of mentality. Druids should be scary as shit, And they were. There were 9 Archdruids at this moot, along with the Hierophant of the world, in order to decide things. Most of the debate came down to, well, I can bite harder than you, and I can kill you if you don't agree with me. And several of the party members were really digging this level of diplomacy. Most of the time, whenever they just couldn't start going into words anymore, they would just go out back, and it was basically Ragnarok happening. Spells were flying, shit was going down, they were attacking each other. Fortunately, the Hierophant was already an incredibly powerful druid. He was like level 15 or so, and plus he had an artifact called the Crown of Thorns. The Crown of Thorns is kind of like the Shield of the Sun from 3.5 edition D&D. It basically, while wearing it, it gives you 20 levels in druid. And yeah, it's a completely broken item, but I thought it was appropriate for this, and I was very happy with it. And no one touched the Hierophant, thank God, because if they did, they would have been obliterated. But essentially speaking, the Hierophant was just there to revive and or heal like druids who got too banged up, and then once they kind of cooled off and got their fight on, they then went back inside the palace and started debating again. This debate went on for quite a while. During this time, not much happened. Most of the party members were just kind of keeping things up, just forming friendships here and there. That was going on, and things were happening, and it was just going very, very slow. The party was starting to get very bored. However, fortunately, one of the druids was a half-elf, half-dwarf. He called himself a dwelf, which I believe is a thing that's a thing. He has gone ahead and fixed up their super wagon for them. Some bards and some other like artists and stuff started painting their logo on the side, and their super wagon was now really decked out, really reinforced, and had all these nice things on it. So they were very, very happy with the outcome of what happened. Their super wagon got all the nice things onto it. And essentially, this was going on for some time until one day, the party and the druids get a letter from somebody. And this letter was actually a package. And the package was wrapped in elven skin. And it had this very dark and foreboding atmosphere on it. They opened it up, and inside was an ear. It was like a shriveled elven ear, along with a letter. And that letter stated that it was from Zatch the Blood Moon, and he has sworn not to bother the Druids of the Grove anymore, and he was actually going to play low for quite some time. And he swore on his honor as a Duke of Hell that he was actually going to leave the Druids alone, and that solved a lot of problems right away. It worried the party to hell, but the Druids just kind of stopped caring after that. It was actually very, very odd. Also, he also said that he wanted to give the Dragons of the Grove a favor in exchange for having him freed. He explained in his letter that he had now killed the Necromancer and the Ias Durithil girl, and that the package and the stuffing inside in order to keep the package safe was actually made from the pieces of those two characters. And so it was very consistent with the setting of the last thing. It was very gory and gruesome. So they got this letter, and he explained that the ear was actually something that they could whisper into. If they whisper into that ear, Zatch the Blood Moon will show up within a short amount of time, and he will grant them one favor. Now, the party did not like the sound of this, but they did take the ear. And there was one last thing in the package, and that particular item was the pendant of Ias Durithil. He had decided to give it back to the family because it was rightfully theirs. And the fact that the devil Zatch was being so affable really worried the party, but they just kind of set it aside for now, since he kind of swore that he was going to entertain himself for a few days with the two people that freed him. So yeah, that very dark bit of imagery was in the campaign for a while, and so it kind of solved the problems of the Druids for a while. Now, the Druids appointed a new Archmage. It was actually the Dwelf that helped the party out with their super wagon. They were kind of the deciding factors. There were 3 people up for debate. One was a Gnoll that was from a rival clan of Hoggers. One was actually a Thundercat that I mentioned earlier. Actually, I did not mention that. If you watched our Sands of Horn series, the Thundercats were actually a part of our campaign, and it was dumb, but whatever. So one was a Gnoll, one was a Thundercat, and one was the Dwelf. They were up for Archmage, and thanks to the party's interception, they got a vote in the matter, and they have voted from I think it was 5 to 4 or 6 to 5. I'm not sure what the exact number was. Thanks to them, that Dwelf became Archdruid. And that was kind of his plan all along. That's why he was buttering up the party so much. The Druids also decided that they were going to banish Ias Durithil and all human-like races from the Grove for about about 100 years. They weren't going to banish them permanently, but they were going to reclaim that grove, and Aes Durithil were no longer welcome there, which was the preferred alternative to what some of the druids were suggesting, to wipe out the entire family. And the Dragons of the Grove just were not having that. So coming up with at least a mild compromise, everyone kind of left fairly happily. The Druids of the Grove had promised that the Dragons of the Grove were now permanent allies to them thanks to their services. And that was a great big political leg up, because now they have Aes Durithil and they have the Druids on their side. And so House Michaels is going to have a very difficult time tracking them down from now on. So the party and the Druids and Aes Durithil, while not everyone came out the best in this scenario, everyone was at least relatively happy in the sense that things could have gotten a lot worse. So everyone started parting ways. The dragons headed south in order to get to the Underdark, while other families started heading north and in order to avoid the winter that was coming. Now, the dragons started heading south along the mountain trail to this great big lake that they knew might possibly lead to the Underdark. And as they were traveling south, some things started showing up on the road that they weren't expecting. They started seeing bodies, like, piled up on the sides of the road here and there. And as they started to inspect them, it turns out that these bodies were surprisingly fresh in the sense that while they were cold, there was no decomposition happening. They started doing heal checks and other checks, and they discovered that these bodies all had, like, bite marks along their necks, and there were signs of necromancy occurring. And with that, the party put two and two together, and they realized that the vampire that they left alone for a month had now become very, very active. They started burning all the bodies that they discovered along the way and doing as best they can to stay in sunlight as long as possible. But eventually, they got to a part of the mountain trail that led them into deep shadows, and they were going to stay in darkness for a very, very long time. And that's when Anderthil from Chapter 2 started making his move. Throughout the month that the party spent with the Druids of the Grove in that druid moot, Anderthil has been busy. He has been attacking and gathering people and turning them into vampire spawn, thralls, and other various servants to his necromancy, and he has been setting up traps along it for a long period of time. And this was just a great wagon chase throughout the mountains as they tried to weave in and out of the light, trying to avoid complete darkness, doing whatever they could in order to avoid vampires while simultaneously fighting them and killing them. It was a very long night. No one got any sleep for a couple days. They eventually found themselves on the side of the cliff when the sun was rising that managed to kill a lot of the vampire spawn, and they rested there for about 12 hours as the sun was keeping them safe. And it was a great set of fights, but that only led them through about halfway through the mountains. So after they got their long rest in, they then continued on their way, and they started fighting more and more. But now that Anderthil knew where they were, he could plan their route along the mountain, and they were doing everything they can. They were firing spells, they were using all the resources that they had. It was a long and gruesome fight. Now, they did not get out completely unscathed. I mentioned way earlier in the campaign that the character playing Rex frequently would not show up at sessions, and I thought this was a good time to raise the stakes. I've kind of turned him into an NPC, and at one point, a couple vampire spawn tackled him and pushed him off the super wagon into the abyss below in the mountains. And with that, Rex has died, and we had our first character death. Now, granted, this was, like I said, the player was no longer showing up. I told him what was going to happen. He was okay with it. And so, yes, Rex is dead and he is removed from the party. Or at least he is effectively dead, seemingly for now. And so the chase for the mountains occurs even more and more, and they finally get out into the lake. And they had lots of moonlight to work with, but things weren't doing as well as they had hoped. See, the lake was actually starting to swarm with more and more vampire spawn, and as they were fighting throughout the night, they discovered that there was a cabin nearby called Uncle Tom's Cabin. And I know what that sounds like. I did not know what that term meant when I wrote that name. I just heard the name before, thought it was a funny name, and I named the tavern after that. I'm really sorry if that name offends anyone, but I'm going to just keep it that way for now because that's what it's like in my notes, and that's what I've been calling it for years. If we ever like publish this into something, I will change the name, but please forgive me if I use the name Uncle Tom for now. I'm sorry. They saw this cabin called Uncle Tom's Cabin, and they knew it was in the distance, and it was a tavern that frequently like catered to adventurers. So they knew that there were allies that they could use there. So they were charging along. The sun rose. They killed a lot of vampire spawn, and they made it to Uncle Tom's Cabin. And it turns out that Uncle Tom's Cabin has been dealing with the vampire spawn for a while. And the way this cabin was set up, it's like a tavern that was built into the mountainside. And inside the mountains, it was under various different magical protections. And inside were a bunch of refugees, like other adventurers, and people kind of using this as a home base in order to fight off the vampire spawn. It was very, very difficult for people to travel in and out because it would take several days to get anywhere. But here, they were relatively safe. One of the big things that people were buying while inside the tavern, though, was food, because food was running out very quickly because they had so many refugees, and they were buying up silver. And if you did not know, in D&D, silver was very, very effective against vampires in the sense that you could build weapons out of it and it would bypass their defenses. So the party started setting up shop. They started like telling people who they were. Some people would recognize their names, some people weren't. But with it, they discovered that there are other adventuring parties in here that they could team up with. One particular adventuring party that they met up with was a group called the Black Renegades. Now, I'm going to need to go through my notes for a little bit, but essentially, the Black Renegades were another adventuring party that was actually much higher level than the party. The party at this point had been leveling up very quickly. I kind of just gave them levels up after every session. They were like level 6 or 7 by now, but the Black Renegades were like level 11. And so the party decided to team up with them and go vampire hunting for a bit. And this lasted for a couple days. This would let the players swap in and out. They were doing various things, and they were just doing things to kill vampires for a while trying to come up with a permanent solution for things. One of the things that have been happening is the party have been buying up new equipment. Like Tareq got some stuff, Hogger got a new axe. Like they all started buying equipment, and one of the party members, a Salazan named Tuku, had asked for some money in order to get a phylactery. Now, the party had that one very valuable phylactery earlier, but they had decided to give it to Ayas Durithil. They had decided to give the pendant back to them. Even though it was now a phylactery and it contained a bunch of souls, they thought it was more appropriate to go back to them. So Tuku was a soul artist, and he wanted another phylactery just in case like something bad ever happened again, and he could at least, cast some spells to assist the party. So with that, they gave him some money, like 5,000 gold pieces, and he went out in order to seek a new phylactery. Well, it turns out that he got into a bit of a scuffle, and he killed a noble from a family called Lord Byron. Now, Lord Byron was one of the major noble families that was allied with House Michaels, but there was no formal investigation done afterwards. When they found the body of this Byron character, like immediately charges were kind of dropped and things got really, really suspicious. The party, just kind of counting their blessings, just ignored it. They were just like, it's one less problem. If no one's looking into it, we don't care. I'm going to come back to this later because it does play into a much further thing into the campaign. But remember that a member of House Byron had died due to Tuku, and he stole an item from them. Now, they reprimanded Tuku, and they're like, dude, you shouldn't have fucking done that. But, like, they're just kind of letting things go for now, because the party at this point is just kind of like, things were getting a little desperate. That wasn't very heroic of them, obviously, but it's just something that happened. Now, one of the things that happened while they were there and they were killing vampires is the party had gotten a letter from Ayas Durithil. They got a letter from the guys before. Now, this letter that they got from Ayas Durithil was actually a cry for help. They were saying that they wanted to go ahead and they wanted to hire the party in order to like go hunt vampires with them or something, but there was something really odd about the letter, and they could see that right away. So instead of actually responding, they went ahead and they sent out their own like message. They sent out a message in response like, hey, we need more information before we can just commit ourselves to something like this. I know we helped you guys and we're friends and all that now, but we need more information. A few more days go by, and when they get the letter back, they realize that this letter was actually a fake sent by some assassins from House Michaels. They started scrying the letter, and they went into their super wagon inside of their cabin, and they took their letters and they took all these items that they got that were really, really suspicious, and Tareq started casting scrying spells in order to like find out more things about them. And they found out that the Dragons of the Grove and some other people, and some specific party members were now not only the enemies of House Michaels, but now House Byron's, and what shocked them the most, several families within the Underdark. Now, what I mentioned earlier, the Underdark is incredibly difficult to get in and out of. In fact, for a long time, no one thought that the Underdark even really, existed in the sense that there were civilized people down there. They thought it was just a home for monsters. But now that there was a hit put out for them by all these families, there was a lot of concern. They discovered that this group of assassins that were sent out to them was a group called the Council of Rage. Now, the Council of Rage is a council that I took from a D&D website, but I also added some of my own characters, some drow from the Underdark from some various families that opposed Uria's family. And once they joined in, they started calling themselves the Shadow Council. And this was getting really, really interesting because the Shadow Council was their own group of characters with their own identities and stuff. And I'll go into them more in a bit. But once they discovered that the Shadow Council was after them and they discovered who put out the hit for them, they then began to scry into the Shadow Council meeting. So now that they discovered that there are drow on the Shadow Council and they're part of the hit squad that's after them, next they're trying to find out, okay, who in the Underdark knows ways to communicate with us, and who put out the hit? So next, Tareq tried scrying into the Underdark, and that was the part that was going to be very, very tricky. See, in my campaign, the Underdark is actually blocked by this weird, almost... I'm only using the word Cthulhu because, it's some kind of elder outer being that is shielding the Underdark from anything going in and out. And since he tried to scry into the Underdark, I made Tareq make a will save. Natural 1. Tareq tried to scry into the Underdark. He tried to look into the darkness, and the darkness looked back at him, immediately causing Tareq to go insane. I had him roll another will save, another natural 1. I went into the Call of Cthulhu book. I had him roll a sanity check. Worst result he could have gotten. Tareq is now a gibbering mess on the floor, completely insane, and now seemingly possessed by this dark Chthonian-like creature from the Underdark. And that is where we're going to stop today's story, and we'll see you guys next time when our players dive into Tareq's mind and try to extract this creature from his psyche. Catch you guys next time.